Officer Brian Caldwell's voice boomed across the marble lobby of the county courthouse in downtown Chicago. The elegantly dressed black woman with the leather briefcase stopped cold, her composure wavering for just a moment. "Excuse me." Caldwell swaggered over, badge gleaming. In his early days there after his last incident, but he knew trash when he saw it. "You deaf?" I said, "Get your broke ass to the welfare office where you belong." Her jaw clenched, but her voice stayed controlled. "Officer, I'm here on court business. Please check the docket." "Check what?" He laughed cruelly. "The only thing I need to check is how fast you can get out." When she stepped toward the restricted judicial area, Caldwell snapped. His hand crashed her against the wall. "Stupid. Know your place." Her briefcase shattered across the floor as his hands wrapped around her throat. "Check the docket," she gasped. His radio screamed, "Stand down." He squeezed harder. "Have you ever been this catastrophically wrong?" Later, Officer Brian Caldwell sat in the witness box looking every inch the professional law enforcement officer. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, and his voice carried the confident authority of someone who had testified in court dozens of times before. To the casual observer, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a dedicated public servant who had simply done his job. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Emily Thompson, approached the witness stand with measured steps. "Officer Caldwell, please tell the court about your experience and training." Caldwell straightened his shoulders, speaking directly to the jury with practiced ease. "I've been in law enforcement for years, Your Honor. I started as a patrol officer and worked my way up. I've completed specialized training in courthouse security, crowd control, and threat assessment. My job is to protect the integrity of judicial proceedings and ensure the safety of everyone in this building." "And how long have you been assigned to this particular courthouse?" "For a short time now. I was transferred here from the downtown precinct in Chicago to bring my expertise to this facility." He conveniently omitted the real reason for his transfer, a series of complaints about his treatment of minority citizens that his supervisors hoped would disappear with a change of venue. Thompson nodded. "Tell us about the morning of the incident." Caldwell shifted slightly, adopting what he clearly believed was a reasonable, measured tone. "I was performing my regular security duties when I observed an individual entering through the public entrance who appeared agitated and out of place. As part of my training, I'm taught to identify potential security risks before they escalate." "What made you identify this person as a potential risk?" "Several factors," Caldwell replied, counting on his fingers as if he had given this considerable thought. "First, her demeanor was hostile from the moment I approached her. Second, she was attempting to access restricted areas without proper authorization. Third, when I attempted to redirect her to the appropriate public seating area, she became increasingly combative and non-compliant." The defense attorney, a middle-aged man named James Riley, had prepared Caldwell well for this moment. Every word was calculated to paint him as a professional doing his job under difficult circumstances. "Can you describe the escalation of this incident?" Caldwell leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a tone of regretful necessity. "I approached the individual in a calm, professional manner and explained courthouse protocols. I informed her that defendants and visitors needed to remain in designated public areas. Rather than comply, she became verbally aggressive and insisted she had some kind of special access rights." "What happened next?" "She began moving toward the restricted judicial areas despite my clear instructions. When I moved to intercept her, she became physically aggressive." Caldwell paused as if the memory pained him. "Your Honor, in my years of law enforcement, I've learned to recognize when someone is preparing to become violent. Her body language, her verbal threats, everything indicated she was about to escalate to physical confrontation." "So you used physical restraint?" "I used the minimum force necessary to control the situation and protect the courthouse," Caldwell replied firmly. "My training teaches us to act decisively when someone poses a threat to judicial proceedings. She was attempting to breach secure areas and had become physically aggressive when prevented from doing so." Officer Tony Rivera, Caldwell's backup that morning, corroborated the story with seamless precision. "I responded to Officer Caldwell's call for assistance and observed the subject in an extremely agitated state. She appeared to be under the influence of something. Her speech was erratic, her movements unpredictable. When we attempted to calm her down and escort her to appropriate seating, she became combative." Did you observe Officer Caldwell use excessive force? Absolutely not, Rivera replied without hesitation. Everything he did was by the book. We're trained to control situations quickly before they spiral out of control. The subject's resistance required us to use approved restraint techniques. The defense painted a picture of two professional officers faced with an unruly individual who refused to follow basic courthouse protocol. Caldwell described his actions as reluctant but necessary, emphasizing his years of experience and clean record. Officer Caldwell, his attorney asked during direct examination, in your professional opinion, did you have any choice but to physically restrain this individual? Caldwell looked directly at the jury, his expression grave. Sir, courthouse security is not a game. We've seen what happens when people with ill intent gain access to restricted areas. Judges, attorneys, court staff, they depend on us to maintain order. When someone refuses to comply with basic security protocols and becomes physically aggressive, we have seconds to make decisions that protect everyone in the building. And in those seconds, what was your primary concern? The safety and security of this courthouse and everyone in it, Caldwell replied solemnly. That's what I swore an oath to protect, and that's what I did that morning. The defense team had done their homework. They presented Caldwell's service record, highlighting commendations for bravery and his recent completion of additional security training. They emphasized his clean disciplinary record at his previous assignment, carefully avoiding any mention of the complaints that had actually led to his transfer. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, his attorney said during his opening statement, you will hear testimony about a split-second decision made by a dedicated officer faced with an aggressive individual who refused to follow basic security protocols. Officer Caldwell didn't wake up that morning planning to use force. He was simply doing the job you pay him to do, protecting our courts. As Caldwell stepped down from the witness stand, he caught sight of the woman he had restrained sitting calmly at the plaintiff's table. Even now, something about her composure irritated him. She sat too straight, listened too intently, took notes with too much precision. Everything about her suggested she thought she was better than she actually was. What Caldwell didn't realize was that his testimony had just sealed his fate. Every lie, every embellishment, every calculated omission was about to be systematically destroyed by evidence he never knew existed. And a truth so devastating it would end not just his career, but his freedom. The woman he had dismissed as a ghetto rat was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. When Chief Judge Denise Harper rose to take the witness stand, the courtroom fell into an unusual quiet. There was something in the way she moved, deliberate, composed, unshakable, that commanded attention without demanding it. Her voice, when she spoke to be sworn in, carried a distinctive rasp that hadn't been there before the incident. Please state your name for the record, the prosecutor began gently. Chief Judge Denise Harper. Her voice was clear, but noticeably each word was carefully measured, as if speaking required conscious effort. Chief Judge Harper, I notice your voice sounds strained. Can you explain why? She touched her throat almost reflexively, a gesture so subtle that most of the jury missed it. My vocal cords were damaged during the incident we're here to discuss today. The doctors say the hoarseness may be permanent. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something about her calm delivery unsettled him more than screaming would have. Can you tell us about the morning of the incident? Chief Judge Harper straightened slightly, her hands folded precisely in her lap. I arrived at the courthouse for what was a very important day of hearings. I had chosen to enter through the public entrance rather than the staff entrance because I wanted to observe how citizens are welcomed into our judicial system. Why was this observation important to you? I believe strongly that everyone who enters a courthouse should be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their appearance or perceived social status. I wanted to see firsthand how that principle was being upheld. The prosecutor nodded. What happened when you entered the building? Almost immediately, I was approached by Officer Caldwell. His opening words to me were, and I quote, "What's a ghetto rat like you doing in my courthouse?" A shocked murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge looked startled by the bluntness of the language. Chief Judge Harper continued without changing her tone. I was taken aback by the language, but I remained calm and polite. I told him I was there on court business and asked him to check the docket. How did Officer Caldwell respond? He told me to get my, quote, broke ass to the welfare office where I belonged. When I attempted to explain that I was there for legitimate court proceedings, he became increasingly hostile, and refused to check any documentation. What happened next? Chief Judge Harper's hand moved unconsciously to her throat again. When I tried to proceed toward the area where I needed to be for the morning's hearings, Officer Caldwell physically intercepted me. He slammed me against the marble wall with sufficient force that my briefcase fell and its contents scattered across the floor. And then Officer Caldwell placed both hands around my throat and began to squeeze. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, the rasp more pronounced. I could barely breathe, but I managed to gasp out, "Check the docket," repeatedly. I was trying to tell him to verify who I was and why I was there. How long did this strangulation last? I'm not entirely certain. When you can't breathe, time becomes very distorted. It felt like an eternity. But the medical testimony will show it was long enough to cause significant trauma to my throat and vocal cords. The prosecutor approached with a medical report. "Chief Judge Harper, you sought medical attention immediately after this incident. Can you describe your injuries?" The emergency room physician documented bruising around my throat consistent with manual strangulation, swelling of my vocal cords, and minor abrasions on my neck. The doctor explained that the type of grip Officer Caldwell used could have been fatal if maintained for just a little longer. Caldwell's attorney objected to the medical speculation, but the damage was done. The jury had heard that this was potentially a life-threatening assault. Chief Judge Harper, during this attack, were you able to communicate anything to Officer Caldwell about why you were there? I tried repeatedly. Even while being choked, I managed to say, "I'm Chief Judge Harper," several times, along with asking him to check the docket. Unfortunately, he was either unable or unwilling to hear what I was saying. There it was, the first hint of something larger. Several jury members leaned forward slightly. "Chief Judge Harper, what did that mean? You mentioned your briefcase and its contents. What was in that briefcase?" Chief Judge Harper paused, and for the first time, something that might have been a slight smile crossed her face. "Among other things, my judicial credentials and the complete schedule for that morning's court proceedings. Everything Officer Caldwell would have needed to verify my identity and my reason for being there was scattered across the courthouse floor while he had his hands around my throat." Chief Judge Harper, you've referred several times to that morning's hearings and needing to be in a particular area of the courthouse. Can you be more specific about your business there? The prosecutor was building toward something, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. I was there for my first week of hearings in my new position. I had been looking forward to that day for months. It represented the culmination of years of hard work and preparation for a role I had recently been appointed to. What role was that? Chief Judge Harper looked directly at Caldwell for the first time since taking the stand. Her expression was not one of anger or vengeance, but of profound sadness. "I'm afraid I will have to wait for the appropriate moment in these proceedings," she said quietly. "But I will say this. Everything Officer Caldwell needed to know about who I was and why I was there was readily available to him." He chose not to look. The courtroom was electric with tension. What position could this woman possibly hold that would make this incident even more damaging than it already appeared? Caldwell felt a cold chill run down his spine. Something in her tone, in the way she held herself, in the careful precision of her words suggested that his nightmare was just beginning. As Chief Judge Harper concluded her testimony, she touched her throat one final time. "I want to be clear about something. I bear no personal animosity toward Officer Caldwell, but what happened to me that morning cannot be allowed to happen to anyone else. The courthouse should be a place where justice is served, not where citizens are assaulted for the color of their skin." When she stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained unusually quiet. Everyone present understood they had just witnessed something significant, but the full magnitude of what they had heard was still hidden. Caldwell watched her return to the plaintiff's table, his confidence beginning to crack for the first time since this ordeal began. There was something about the way the attorneys treated her, something about her command of legal language, something about the way she carried herself that suggested his assumptions about her had been catastrophically wrong. But just how wrong he was about to discover. Shortly before the incident that would change everything, Chief Judge Denise Harper stood in her home office, surrounded by boxes of legal documents and case files. The official letter lay open on her mahogany desk, the embossed seal of the State Judicial Commission still crisp and new. After many years as a family law attorney, she had finally achieved her dream. appointment as Chief Judge of the Family Court Division. Her husband James looked up from his own legal briefs. As a civil rights attorney, he understood the significance of her appointment better than most. Nervous about the new courthouse, Denise picked up a thick folder containing personnel files and building layouts. I've never worked in this particular building before. Different staff, different procedures, different security protocols. I want to make sure I understand everything before I start presiding. Smart approach, James said, but his tone carried a note of concern. Have you researched the security staff? Denise opened her laptop and pulled up the employee database she'd been granted access to as an incoming judge. There's something troubling here. Look at this transfer record for Officer Brian Caldwell. James moved to read over her shoulder. Transferred for interpersonal challenges and attitude adjustments needed. That's code for racism, isn't it? Usually. Denise scrolled through Caldwell's file, noting the pattern of complaints from minority citizens that had been consistently dismissed or downplayed. Several different precincts over the years. Always the same issues, never any real consequences. Her phone rang, another judge calling to congratulate her on the appointment, but as the conversation progressed, it took a darker turn. Denise, I have to warn you about something, said Judge Linda Vargas from the downtown courthouse. Security can be challenging for judges who don't fit their expectations of what a judge looks like. What do you mean? Recently, courthouse security stopped me several times in 1 week, asked for my ID, questioned why I was in judicial areas, suggested I might be lost. I've been a judge for years. They see a Latina woman and assume I'm a defendant or a translator. Denise felt a chill. Have you reported this? To whom? The security supervisor who hired these officers in the first place? The administrative staff who think these are isolated incidents? The system protects itself. Denise, you know that. After hanging up, Denise made several more calls to colleagues across the state. The stories were depressingly similar. Judge Thompson in the Northern District had been escorted out of his own courtroom by security who assumed he was an attorney who had overstayed his welcome. Judge Carter had been asked to show her bar card several times in a single day. Judge Jackson had been told to wait in the public area like everyone else when arriving for work. It's a pattern, James observed as Denise documented the conversations. Systemic bias masquerading as security protocol. Denise spent the next several evenings researching courthouse security policies, discrimination law, and the legal precedents for addressing bias in judicial facilities. She wasn't just preparing for her new job. She was preparing for a battle she hoped she'd never have to fight. Why are you collecting all this? James asked as she compiled yet another folder of evidence. Because if something happens to me, I want to be ready to prove it's not an isolated incident. This isn't just about individual bad actors. It's about a system that allows this behavior to continue unchecked. A few days before her first scheduled hearing, Denise decided to visit the courthouse to familiarize herself with the building layout. She deliberately chose to enter through the public entrance rather than the staff entrance, a decision that would prove prophetic. I want to see how citizens are treated when they come seeking justice, she explained to James that morning. How can I preside fairly if I don't understand the full experience of coming to our courts? James kissed her goodbye, but his expression was troubled. Be careful. New black judge plus racist courthouse security equals a target on your back. I can handle whatever they throw at me, Denise replied confidently. I've been preparing for this my entire career. That evening, their young daughter Lily noticed her mother's voice sounded different after a day of phone calls and meetings. Mommy, why do you sound sad? Denise knelt down to her daughter's level, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have to work very hard to make sure everyone gets treated fairly. Sweetheart, it can be tiring, but it's important work. Are you going to make things fair? I'm certainly going to try. As she tucked Lily into bed that night, Denise couldn't have imagined that within days her own voice would be damaged from trying to speak while being strangled, and that her carefully prepared research would become the foundation for the most important legal battle of her career. The irony wasn't lost on her later. She had spent time preparing for potential discrimination, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment when preparation would give way to survival. The moment prosecutor Emily Thompson announced, "The people call our next witness, technology specialist Rachel Evans," the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Caldwell had been confident in his version of events, but now came the moment when technology would either vindicate or destroy him. Evans, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, approached the witness stand carrying a tablet and a thick folder of documents. As the courthouse's head of security systems, she had access to everything that had been recorded that morning. "Miss Evans, please describe your role at the courthouse." "I'm responsible for maintaining and analyzing all security camera footage, audio recording systems, and digital evidence storage. Every inch of this courthouse is monitored around the clock and every second is digitally archived." Thompson nodded. "Did you review the footage from the incident? Specifically the incident involving Officer Caldwell and Chief Judge Harper?" "I did. Multiple angles, full audio, complete timeline from when she entered to when the situation was resolved." "Let's start with the initial contact. What does the footage show?" Evans consulted her notes. "Chief Judge Harper enters through the public entrance. She's walking normally, briefcase in hand, completely calm. Shortly after, Officer Caldwell approaches her. The audio clearly captures his first words. 'What's a ghetto rat like you doing in my courthouse?' A collective intake of breath filled the courtroom. Hearing it described clinically made it somehow worse. How does Chief Judge Harper respond?" She stops walking, turns to face him and says, "Excuse me?" Her body language remains non-threatening throughout. She's not aggressive, not combative. She's clearly shocked by his language. Thompson moved closer to the jury. What happens next? Officer Caldwell escalates immediately. He says, and I quote from the audio transcript, "You deaf? I said get your broke ass to the welfare office where you belong." Chief Judge Harper responds by saying she's there on court business and asks him to check something. The audio suggests she's trying to say, "Check the docket." Caldwell's attorney objected. Speculation about what she was trying to say. "Overruled," the judge replied. "The witness may describe what she observed." Evans continued. The footage shows Chief Judge Harper attempting to explain her presence. She's gesturing toward her briefcase, clearly trying to show identification or documentation. Officer Caldwell refuses to look at anything and becomes increasingly hostile. Ich call from Gantan. Does the footage show Chief Judge Harper becoming aggressive or combative as Officer Caldwell testified? Absolutely not. At no point does Chief Judge Harper raise her voice, make threatening gestures, or display any aggressive behavior. She remains calm and professional throughout the encounter, even as Officer Caldwell becomes more hostile. Thompson played the crucial moment for the jury. "Miss Evans, what does the footage show happening next?" Chief Judge Harper attempts to move past Officer Caldwell toward the restricted area. This is when he physically assaults her. The footage clearly shows him grabbing her and slamming her against the marble wall with significant force. Her briefcase falls and its contents scatter across the floor. And then, Evans's voice grew grim, Officer Caldwell places both hands around Chief Judge Harper's throat and begins choking her. The footage shows her feet briefly leaving the ground due to the force of his grip. How long does this strangulation last? Long enough to cause serious injury, potentially long enough to be fatal. The courtroom was dead silent. Several minutes of someone being choked was an eternity. "Ms. Evans, does the audio capture anything Chief Judge Harper says during the assault?" "Yes. Despite being choked, she manages to say, 'I'm Chief Judge Harper' multiple times. She also repeatedly gasps, 'Check the docket!' Even while being strangled, she's trying to identify herself." This was the bombshell. Several jury members sat up straighter. "Chief Judge Harper," Thompson pressed forward, "you mentioned Officer Caldwell received radio communications during this incident." "Correct. His radio crackles with, 'Stand down immediately, stop what you're doing and step away.' The message is repeated several times. Officer Caldwell ignores all the commands. Who is giving these orders?" Courthouse administration had been alerted by early arriving staff who recognized the assault victim. They were desperately trying to stop the attack. Caldwell's face had gone pale. He remembered hearing something on his radio, but he'd been too focused on what he believed was his duty to listen. "Miss Evans, you mentioned early arriving staff. Did anyone witness this incident?" "Yes. Court reporter Susan Morales arrived shortly after and immediately recognized the victim. She ran to call courthouse administration and security supervisors." Thompson called Morales to the stand. The court reporter, a woman in her 50s who had worked in the courthouse system for many years, was visibly shaken as she described what she witnessed. "I've seen Chief Judge Harper in courtrooms across the state for years," Morales testified. "The moment I saw Officer Caldwell with his hands around her throat, I knew we had a catastrophe on our hands. Why didn't you intervene directly? A small woman against a large police officer. I ran to get help instead. I called every administrator I could reach, screaming at them to radio their security officers to stop the assault immediately. The prosecutor then introduced phone records showing a flurry of calls from courthouse administration to security, all made during the attack and all ignored by Caldwell. Dr. Catherine Hayes, the emergency room physician who treated Chief Judge Harper, provided devastating medical testimony. The patient presented with severe throat trauma consistent with manual strangulation. The bruising pattern indicated sustained pressure applied by adult male hands. The swelling of her vocal cords was so severe that she could barely speak above a whisper. Doctor, in your professional opinion, how serious was this assault? If the strangulation had continued for a little longer, we would have been dealing with a fatality. This was not a minor altercation. This was a near murder. But perhaps the most damning evidence came from Caldwell's own personnel file. Thompson methodically went through his history, several transfers over the years, all due to conflicts with minority citizens, multiple complaints of excessive force, all dismissed, a pattern of behavior that his supervisors had chosen to transfer rather than address. Ladies and gentlemen, Thompson told the jury, this wasn't a split-second decision by a professional officer. This was the inevitable result of years of unchecked racism and violence, enabled by a system that chose to transfer problems rather than solve them. As the evidence mounted, Caldwell slumped lower in his chair. Every lie he had told was being systematically destroyed by objective facts. The audio didn't lie, the video didn't lie, the medical evidence didn't lie. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. As Evans prepared to step down, she mentioned one final detail that made the entire courtroom freeze. Oh, and one more thing. The scattered contents of Chief Judge Harper's briefcase. Our cameras captured those too. Among the items on the floor were her judicial appointment papers, her courthouse ID badge, and the complete hearing schedule for that morning, showing her presiding over several family court cases that morning. Several families had waited for hours for their judge that morning. Several families whose lives were disrupted because Officer Brian Caldwell had chosen to assault the very person they were waiting for. The truth was devastating, but it wasn't complete. The biggest shock was still coming. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations as prosecutor Emily Thompson prepared for the moment everyone had been waiting for. The hints had been building, references to Chief Judge Harper, judicial credentials, courthouse schedules, but no one was prepared for what came next. Chief Judge Harper, Thompson said, her voice carrying the weight of the revelation to come. For the record, please state your full name and current professional title. Chief Judge Harper stood slowly, her posture radiating the quiet authority that had unsettled Caldwell from their first encounter. When she spoke, her voice was clear despite the rasp that would forever remind her of that morning. My name is Chief Judge Denise Harper, and I am the Chief Judge of the Family Court Division for this judicial district. The courtroom exploded. Gasps echoed off the marble walls. Jury members sat forward in shock. Spectators turned to each other in disbelief. The court reporter's fingers froze over her keyboard for a moment before frantically trying to capture the chaos. Officer Brian Caldwell felt the blood drain from his face. His hands began to shake as the full magnitude of what he had done crashed over him like a tsunami. The woman he had called a ghetto rat, the woman he had told to get her broke ass to the welfare office, the woman whose throat he had squeezed for an extended period. She was a judge, not just any judge, the Chief Judge of Family Court. Thompson waited for the noise to subside before continuing. Chief Judge Harper, when were you appointed to this position? I received my judicial appointment shortly before the incident. That morning was scheduled to be my first day presiding over this courthouse. Another wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the room. Caldwell closed his eyes, trying to process the impossible reality. He had attacked his new boss. He had strangled the woman who would have been evaluating courthouse security protocols, including his own performance. Chief Judge Harper, can you explain why Officer Caldwell wouldn't have recognized you? Certainly. I had never worked in this particular courthouse building before my appointment. Officer Caldwell had only been transferred here recently. We were both new to this facility, which is precisely why I had planned to introduce myself to the security staff on my first day. And where were you going when Officer Caldwell intercepted you? Chief Judge Harper turned to look directly at Caldwell, her expression more sad than angry. I was walking to courtroom 3A, my courtroom. I was heading to the bench where I was scheduled to preside over several family court cases that morning. The irony was devastating. The restricted area Caldwell had been so determined to protect her from accessing was her own judicial chambers. The bench he had prevented her from approaching was where she was supposed to spend her day dispensing justice. Chief Judge Harper, what was in the briefcase that Officer Caldwell refused to examine? My judicial appointment papers signed by the governor and the State Judicial Commission, my courthouse identification badge, my bar admission certificate, and the complete schedule for that morning showing me presiding over several cases beginning at the start of the day. Thompson moved closer to the jury box. In other words, everything Officer Caldwell needed to verify your identity and authority was in your possession the entire time. Everything and more. If he had simply asked for identification instead of immediately resorting to racial slurs and physical violence, this entire incident could have been avoided. Caldwell felt sick. He remembered her trying to show him something from her briefcase. He remembered her repeated requests to check the docket. She had been trying to identify herself, and he had been too blinded by his prejudices to listen. Chief Judge Harper, help the jury understand the full scope of this incident. You were appointed Chief Judge of Family Court. What does that position entail? As Chief Judge, I oversee all family court operations in this district. I supervise other judges, manage court administration, and am responsible for courthouse security protocols and personnel evaluations. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Caldwell hadn't just attacked a random citizen. He hadn't just assaulted a judge. He had strangled the person who soon would have been responsible for evaluating his job performance and determining his future employment. Chief Judge Harper, what happened to the families scheduled to appear before you that morning? Her voice grew heavy with regret. Several families waited for hours for their judge to arrive. Child custody hearings, adoption proceedings, domestic violence protection orders, all delayed because I was in the emergency room being treated for strangulation injuries. Thompson let that sink in. These families were waiting for you. They were waiting for me. While Officer Caldwell had his hands around my throat, parents were sitting in my courtroom wondering why their custody hearing wasn't starting. A family hoping to finalize an adoption was growing anxious about delays. A domestic violence victim seeking a protection order was left wondering if the system would protect her. The human cost of Caldwell's actions was staggering. This wasn't just an assault on one person, it was an attack on the administration of justice itself. Caldwell stared at his hands, unable to look up. Everything he thought he knew about that morning had been catastrophically wrong. The professional woman he had dismissed as a ghetto rat was the most powerful person in the courthouse. The broke ass he had told to go to the welfare office controlled budgets in the millions. The person he had choked nearly to death was the very person the courthouse security existed to protect. As Chief Judge Harper returned to her seat, the courtroom remained unnaturally quiet. Everyone present understood they had just witnessed one of the most complete reversals of fortune in legal history. Officer Brian Caldwell, who had woken up that morning believing he was protecting the courthouse, had instead committed the most serious assault in its history against the person he was sworn to serve. The revelation that Officer Caldwell had strangled a chief judge was devastating enough, but Prosecutor Emily Thompson wasn't finished. As Caldwell sat slumped in the defendant's chair, his world already in ruins, Thompson prepared to expose the systematic nature of his racism that had led to this moment. Officer Caldwell, Thompson began, her voice sharp as a scalpel. Let's talk about your career history. Caldwell's attorney objected. Relevance, Your Honor. This goes to pattern and intent, Thompson replied. I'll allow it, the judge ruled. Thompson opened a thick file. Officer Caldwell, in the past several years, how many times have you been transferred? Caldwell mumbled his answer. Several times. I'm sorry. Could you speak up for the jury? Several times, he said louder, his voice hollow. And what was the official reason for your transfer from the downtown precinct in Chicago? Caldwell's attorney coached him to stick to the euphemisms. Interpersonal challenges require a fresh environment. Interpersonal challenges, Thompson repeated. Let me read from your supervisor's private notes obtained through discovery. She held up a document. Quote, Officer Caldwell has received multiple complaints from minority citizens regarding excessive force and discriminatory language. Recommend transfer to reduce liability exposure." End quote. The jury was taking notes. Now, this wasn't an isolated incident. Officer Caldwell, during your time at the West Side Precinct in Chicago, how many formal complaints were filed against you? I don't recall the exact number. Let me help you remember. Numerous complaints over a short period. Would you like me to read some of them? Caldwell shook his head, but Thompson continued anyway. Mrs. Carla Jackson, African-American attorney. Officer Caldwell demanded to see my bar card several times in 1 week, questioned my right to be in attorney areas, and suggested I might be impersonating a lawyer. Sound familiar? The parallel to his treatment of Chief Judge Harper was unmistakable. Dr. Marcus Thompson, black physician serving jury duty. Officer Caldwell insisted I was in the wrong building, told me medical court was downtown, and physically escorted me to the exit despite my attempts to show my jury summons. Thompson moved closer to Caldwell. Officer Caldwell, do you see a pattern in these complaints? I was just doing my job. Were you doing your job when you told Dr. Thompson that people like him don't serve on juries in real court? Caldwell's face flushed. Those words had come back to haunt him. Let's talk about the incident that got you transferred from the West Side. Are you familiar with attorney David Rodriguez? Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. He knew where this was going. Mr. Rodriguez is a Latino attorney who filed a federal civil rights complaint against you. Can you tell the jury what happened? There was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Thompson's voice rose. You placed Mr. Rodriguez in a chokehold because you assumed he was a defendant trying to approach the bench without permission. Does this sound familiar, Officer Caldwell? The courtroom went silent. Another choking incident. Another minority professional. Another pattern of violence. How long did you choke Mr. Rodriguez? It wasn't a chokehold. It was a restraint technique. Answer the question. How long did you restrict his breathing? Caldwell's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard enough. Thompson pulled out more files. Officer Caldwell, in your career, can you name a single incident where you used force against a white professional? Caldwell sat silent. I'll take that as a no, but you've used force against several black attorneys, Latino doctors, an Asian judge, and now Chief Judge Harper. Do you see a pattern? I don't see race, Caldwell began. You don't see race, Thompson interrupted. Then explain why your first words to Chief Judge Harper were, "What's a ghetto rat like you doing in my courthouse?" Were you colorblind when you told her to get her broke ass to the welfare office? Caldwell had no answer. Every word he had spoken that morning revealed his racial animus. Officer Caldwell, you testified that you could tell by looking at someone where they belong. What exactly did you see when you looked at Chief Judge Harper, a person who seemed out of place? What made her seem out of place? Her expensive briefcase, her professional attire, her calm demeanor, or was it simply the color of her skin? Thompson gave him no time to answer. Officer Caldwell, a briefcase and professional attire made you fear for your life. I didn't fear for my life. Then why did you use deadly force? Strangulation is classified as deadly force, Officer Caldwell. You used potentially lethal violence against a woman carrying a briefcase because she was walking toward her own courtroom. The prosecutor's final question was devastating. Officer Caldwell, if Chief Judge Harper had been a white woman, would you have called her a ghetto rat? Caldwell sat in silence. Any answer would destroy him further. If she had been white, would you have told her to get her broke ass to the welfare office? Still silence. If she had been white, would you have put your hands around her throat and squeezed for an extended period? Caldwell finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know. You don't know, Thompson repeated. But we do know this, don't we? In your years of police work, you've never choked a white professional. You've never used racial slurs against a white attorney. You've never assumed a white person in a suit was a criminal. Thompson turned to the jury. Officer Caldwell wants us to believe this was about security, but the evidence shows it was about something else entirely. It was about a black woman walking through a courthouse with confidence, and Officer Caldwell's belief that people like her don't belong in places like this. As Thompson returned to her seat, Caldwell finally understood the full scope of his catastrophe. This wasn't just about one morning's violence. It was about a career built on racist assumptions, finally colliding with consequences he could no longer escape. The woman he had choked was now his judge, and she held his future in her hands. The courtroom fell silent as Prosecutor Emily Thompson rose for her closing argument. Behind her sat Chief Judge Denise Harper, her hand unconsciously touching the faint scars still visible on her throat. In the defendant's chair, Officer Brian Caldwell stared at his hands, a broken man awaiting judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Thompson began, her voice carrying the weight of justice itself. "What you have witnessed over these past days is not simply a case of excessive force. This is attempted murder disguised as law enforcement." She moved toward the jury box, making eye contact with each member. "The medical evidence is clear. Manual strangulation can cause death within a few minutes." Officer Caldwell maintained his grip on Chief Judge Harper's throat for an extended period. He was close to committing murder. Thompson gestured toward Caldwell. "The defense wants you to believe this was a split-second decision under pressure. But strangling someone for an extended period isn't a split-second decision. It's a sustained, deliberate attempt to cause serious bodily harm or death. More disturbing still," Thompson continued, "this wasn't security. This was a near lynching in our house of justice. Officer Caldwell saw a black woman walking with confidence through a courthouse, and his racist assumptions turned him into a would-be killer." The prosecutor picked up the audio transcript. Let's not forget his exact words. "What's a ghetto rat like you doing in my courthouse?" This wasn't confusion about protocol. This was pure racial hatred. Thompson turned to face Caldwell directly. "Officer Caldwell, you didn't just attack a citizen. You didn't just assault a judge. You attempted to murder the chief judge of family court while she was walking to her own courtroom to serve justice." Caldwell's attorney, James Riley, rose for his closing argument, knowing he was facing an impossible task. His client's own words had condemned him, and the evidence was overwhelming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Riley began weakly, "Officer Caldwell made a terrible mistake. But mistakes, even serious ones, are not crimes requiring the destruction of a man's life. My client had no way of knowing Chief Judge Harper was a judge. He was transferred to an unfamiliar courthouse with inadequate orientation. In a moment of poor judgment, he made assumptions that led to regrettable consequences." Riley's voice grew more desperate. "Yes, Officer Caldwell used inappropriate language. Yes, he used excessive force. But attempted murder requires intent to kill, and there's no evidence my client intended to take Chief Judge Harper's life." But even Riley seemed to know his arguments were hollow. The audio recordings were damning. The pattern of racism was undeniable. The medical evidence was terrifying. Thompson rose for her rebuttal, and her words cut through Riley's weak defense like a sword. "Intent to kill." Thompson's voice was incredulous. "Officer Caldwell called Chief Judge Harper a ghetto rat and told her to get her broke ass to the welfare office. Then he choked her for an extended period while she gasped, 'I'm Chief Judge Harper.' If that's not intent to seriously harm or kill, what is?" The defense talks about mistakes, but this wasn't a mistake. It was the inevitable result of years of unchecked racism and violence. The only mistake was allowing Officer Caldwell to continue wearing a badge after numerous complaints. Thompson's final words resonated through the courtroom. Chief Judge Harper came to work that morning to serve justice. Instead, she nearly died because Officer Caldwell believed that people who look like her don't belong in places like this. Today, you have the power to prove him wrong. The jury deliberated for a short time. When they returned, the forewoman stood with the gravity of someone delivering historic justice. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." Caldwell collapsed in his chair as if the words had physically struck him. "On the charge of civil rights violations under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty." Judge Harrison, who had presided over the trial, looked down at Caldwell with barely concealed disgust. "Officer Caldwell, in my years on this bench, I have never seen a more egregious abuse of power or a more clear-cut case of attempted murder. You took an oath to protect and serve, but instead you nearly killed the very person you were sworn to protect. Your actions that morning were not law enforcement. They were attempted lynching." The judge's voice grew stern. "The judges, I hereby sentence you to many years in state prison for attempted murder with an additional period for civil rights violations. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently." Caldwell aged visibly at that moment. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued, "You are permanently barred from any law enforcement position and ordered to pay a substantial amount in compensatory and punitive damages to Chief Judge Harper." As the bailiffs moved to take Caldwell into custody, Chief Judge Harper rose and spoke for the first time since her testimony. "Your Honor, if I may," she said, her voice still carrying that distinctive rasp that would forever remind everyone of Caldwell's violence. "I want to announce that I will be donating the entire damage award to establish the Courthouse Dignity Initiative, a program to train law enforcement officers in recognizing and eliminating racial bias in judicial settings. No one else should have to gasp, 'check the docket,' while being strangled for the crime of existing while black in our courts." As Caldwell was led away in handcuffs, the irony was complete. The woman he had dismissed as a ghetto rat had just demonstrated more grace and wisdom than he had shown in his entire career. The courthouse he had claimed to protect was now safer because he was no longer in it. And the justice system he had nearly broken with his racism was healing itself through the dignity of the woman he had tried to destroy. In the end, Officer Brian Caldwell learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Justice, when it finally comes, is both swift and absolute. Sometime later, Chief Judge Denise Harper stands at the bench of Courtroom 3A, the same courtroom she was walking toward when Officer Brian Caldwell nearly killed her. The thin scar across her throat catches the morning light, a permanent reminder of how close hatred came to silencing justice forever. Her voice still carries that distinctive rasp when she speaks, but it has become something more powerful than it was before. When Chief Judge Harper calls court to session each morning, everyone present knows they are hearing the voice of survival, dignity, and unshakable resolve. The Courthouse Dignity Initiative, funded by her substantial settlement, has transformed courthouse security across the state. Every officer now receives mandatory bias training, and civilian oversight committees monitor all security interactions. Most importantly, a simple new protocol requires security personnel to request identification before any physical contact, a rule that could have prevented the entire tragedy. The statistics speak to the program's success. Courthouse discrimination complaints have dropped significantly statewide. More importantly, no minority professional has been assaulted by courthouse security since Caldwell's conviction. Meanwhile, former Officer Brian Caldwell serves his sentence in maximum security prison. His wife divorced him shortly after his conviction, taking their children and moving across the country to escape the shame. His police pension was revoked, his house foreclosed, and his reputation destroyed forever. In prison, Caldwell has had plenty of time to reflect on the moments that destroyed his life. Fellow inmates know exactly who he is, the racist cop who tried to murder a judge. That knowledge has made his incarceration particularly difficult, as even among criminals his actions are considered beyond redemption. Chief Judge Harper, however, has become a national symbol of resilience and justice. She speaks at law schools about courage in the face of hatred, testifies before Congress about courthouse security reform, and continues to preside over her family court with the same dignity that carried her through the assault. Her daughter Lily recently asked her mother why she still goes to work at the place where someone hurt her. Chief Judge Harper's answer was simple: because someone has to make sure it never happens again. The several families whose hearings were delayed that terrible morning have all been back to Chief Judge Harper's courtroom since then. Each time they express gratitude, not just for her judicial service, but for her courage in pursuing justice when she could have simply accepted a settlement and remained silent. Perhaps most remarkably, Chief Judge Harper has received letters from courthouse staff across the country, other black judges, Latino attorneys, Asian court reporters, all sharing their own stories of discrimination and thanking her for giving them a voice. Her case has become a catalyst for examining bias throughout the entire judicial system. Today, when Chief Judge Harper walks through that same courthouse entrance where she was nearly murdered, she is greeted with respect, recognition, and genuine warmth from security officers who understand that protecting her means protecting the integrity of justice itself. Her throat scar reminds us that racism nearly killed justice that day. But her continued presence on the bench proves that dignity, courage, and truth are more powerful than hatred. If you've experienced discrimination in a courthouse or any public building, know that your voice matters. Share this story if you believe justice should be colorblind. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about ordinary people who refuse to let injustice have the final word. Hit that notification bell because courage is contagious. And the next story of someone standing up to systematic racism might inspire the change your community needs. Remember, in a world where hatred tries to silence justice, sometimes the most powerful response is simply refusing to be silenced. That's exactly what Chief Judge Denise Harper did. And that's why her voice, scarred but unbroken, continues to call our courts to order each morning. Never underestimate the quiet power of dignity when the world tries to strip it away. In that Chicago courthouse lobby, one man looked at a poised, elegantly dressed black woman and saw nothing but a ghetto rat who didn't belong. What he failed to see was Chief Judge Denise Harper, a brilliant legal mind, a devoted mother, and the very person sworn to uphold justice in the building he thought he was protecting. In a single moment of blind prejudice, Officer Brian Caldwell wrapped his hands around her throat and nearly silenced a voice that had spent a lifetime fighting for fairness. Yet even as she gasped for air, struggling to say, "I'm the judge," her dignity never broke. She didn't scream, she didn't crumble, she simply refused to let hatred define her worth. That is the deepest lesson this story leaves us with. True power doesn't come from a badge or a uniform. It lives in the unbreakable spirit of those who choose grace over rage, truth over revenge, and courage over silence. Chief Judge Harper didn't just win in court. She turned her pain into purpose, donating every dollar of her settlement to train officers and heal a broken system so no one else would ever have to fight for their humanity the way she did. Her scarred voice now carries even greater strength, reminding us all that hatred may wound us, but it can never defeat a heart rooted in dignity and justice. If this story moved you, touched something deep inside, or reminded you of your own battles against prejudice, drop a comment below and tell us, what does dignity mean to you when the world tries to tear you down? Share your thoughts. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories that inspire real change and courage, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Courage is contagious, and together we can keep shining light where darkness still lingers. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.